Hello, I'm Mael Brigde, and I'm with Moon Books. I have this title with them, A Brigid of Ireland Devotional Sun Among Stars. Um, and I wanted to talk to you today about, already I'm going off script. I'll try not to do that too much. But what I want to talk to you about is looking at the old materials like the medieval texts and the folklore, and not just reading what people today are saying about Bridget, but looking at the old stuff and really taking it in, using our creativity to integrate those stories and make them part of ourselves. Because I think that this, well, for me, this has been a really good way of I feel like I'm knowing her better and I'm more connected to her and closer with her. So that is what I'm talking about today. And I have lots of notes. So I wanted to start off by saying that when I was first becoming a devotee of Bridget, that was in the very early 80s, like maybe 81 or something. There was almost nothing that I could have access to. I read one paragraph, I think, in one book that told me about her because I grew up in Canada, not in Ireland or somewhere where Saint Brigit was well known. Of course, I'm thinking of all the places in Canada where she was well known, but not where I grew up. So there was I couldn't get any holy cards or medals or really any information except this one paragraph. And then in the public library, they had Lady Gregory's Book of Saints with one chapter about her, and Alice Curtain's little but wonderful book from the 50s, 57 or something. That was really good. And I reread it a couple of years ago. It's still really good. But that was all I had. So for the next many years, got to stop wobbling the computer. For the next many years, I just kept digging into what I had from those three sources. And that was a great way to start, to really go in deeply to what I had, which wasn't very much, carried me through many years. But then eventually more started to be available. And what I found was that I got really confused after a while because there were so many conflicts in the information that I was getting. Part of that was because of the perspectives of the different authors, and part of it is because Saint Brigit's, especially cultus, has been about for such a long time that it's changed a lot. There have been different places, different people, different times, and so different perspectives, different stories. So putting it all together was very confusing. And the next big thing was that I became really inspired by, particularly Erin Rowan Laurie, who is a Daughter of the Flame. And Daughters of the Flame is the Brigidine flame keeping group that I started in 93. So she is a devotee, but she's also a scholar, and she started to really dig into the materials and unearth some things that I didn't know about and that took me by surprise and even unnerved me a little. So it's good to read everything, I think. Well, you don't have to read everything, but it's good to go through that, reading everything you can get your hands on. And I'm going to continue to do that. But I do think it's really very useful and helpful for our own practice to draw back and focus on the old materials and maybe a few secondary sources to help us with interpreting them, and just focus in on those. So I'm going to give you some names, and you don't need to write them down because Rachel is going to put them in the comments at the end of the talk. But the first thing is, it's important to listen to Irish voices. Almost all of the original materials are Irish, and some of them are Scottish. So there's that. But then also it's important to listen to contemporary Irish voices. A book that's very hard to get these days, but you can get it through your library system on interlibrary loan, I hope, is Sean O'Doohan's Rites of Brigid, Goddess and Saint. Oops, banged the table again. And I think that book was a real turning point in, I was going to say pagan, but also Celtic Christian understanding of and practice with Brigid, because he laid out a lot of folklore, a lot of information that most of us hadn't had access to before that, and just looked through it and thought about it, and some real detailed stuff, some of which is, well, most of which is very familiar to us now, but it certainly wasn't then. Isolde Carmody is an Irish scholar who, with the storyteller Chris Thompson, has a podcast called Story Archaeology, and they have two really good long discussions about Brigid. And I'll be giving you links to that. And then Orla Costello she is Brigid's forge. Not Ford, and she is the person who writes the blog, who runs the Facebook group, and now she has a school as well, all by the same name. So she is really good. She is a devotee and a scholar. Other important secondary sources. I mean, there's lots of good stuff out there, but I wanted to narrow this down a bit, and I have found these to be the most pivotal in my learning about Brigid. So there are international scholars. Lisa Bittell wrote Landscape with Two Saints. Here it is. I always forget the second part of the title. How Genevieve of Paris and Brigid of Kildare built Christianity in barbarian Europe. So half of the book is about Brigid, and she breaks down a lot of confusing material. That was probably the first place where I started to get some clarity on a lot of different things, including looking at the different lives of Saint Brigid and what the story was behind them. So I think that's very helpful. Also can be gotten through the library. And Christina Harrington's Women in a Celtic Church. Forgetting the title again. Ireland. 450 to 1150. Oh dear, you'd think I hadn't practiced this, but I have. She talks about women religious in the Irish church, starting in Brigid's time, around the time Brigid was born, and moving on to 1150. And it's very useful, very helpful for thinking about what Brigid's life might have been like. She also talks about the evidence, as I believe Lisa Bittell does too, the evidence for a lot of the beliefs that we have about Brigid, like the perpetual flame. But I'm not going to discuss that because I'll go on for too long. Also, international pagan authors. Morgan Daimler, her Pagan Portals Brigid is a really good, it's tiny, but it's a really good introduction to Brigid. And what I found revolutionary was that she lists all of the major sources of the most prominent ideas that we have about Brigid today, whether they are ancient or modern, and some of them are very modern ideas. And to have her break that down is extremely useful. Because when you know the origins of the ideas that you have, then you can make a more informed decision about how real they are to you, whether you're going to accept that as a given, whether you're going to reconsider it. It allows us to make our own decisions. Another book, which is not actually about Brigid, is Erin Rowan Laurie's Ogham, Weaving Word Wisdom. And obviously that's about the Ogham. It's also very much looks at the material culture and ideas of the the culture that gives us the Ogham. But it also, because she is a devotee of Brigid, she comes into it quite a bit. And so you can make connections, plants, and just a lot of different things that I can't bring to my mind right now. But I found it very useful for kind of on the ground sort of information about Brigid. And she also gives a really good ethical and practical framework for practicing, as she was writing as a Celtic, I think they were calling themselves Celtic Reconstructionists at the time. But it's certainly not limited in its usefulness to people who are CR or even people who are Irish polytheists. A very useful book. And I really debated about adding this one, but I actually think that if I wasn't me, I would name this book, which is my book. And the reason that I'm including it is because in addition to the essays and practical information, it's got a lot of contemplative material. So you can use it, unlike any of the other books, you can use about 2/3 of this book in your own contemplations, reflections, rituals. Yeah. So, and the point of these secondary sources, all of them, is that they just help to make sense of both the pagan material and Saint Brigid's lives. And there's not necessarily a difference between those two. Pagan material is probably present in some of Brigid's lives, but there's a lot more that is directly about the saint than the goddess. So most of us look at both materials. There's just a few short references to the goddesses of that name in the Irish materials. There's a lot in terms of text and like the manuscripts and the folklore and whatnot of the Irish and the folklore of the Scots. So there's a real temptation for us to assume that everything that looks slightly pagan-y in the saints' material must originate with the goddess. And I think that's a really dangerous, not that anyone's going to die from it, but it's not, it can't be true. Some of it might be linked to a goddess Brigid. Maybe none of it is. Even if it is linked to pagans, to goddesses, to a pagan worldview, it might have nothing to do with our goddess. So we just need to come in with an open mind. And some of these things are also unlikely to be pre-Christian. I think a lot of it is unlikely to be pre-Christian. Some of it probably is. I think the perpetual flame is, to my mind, definitely not pre-Christian. And I think it's probably a fairly late development. But again, that's not what we're here to discuss. The first place that I came across that very idea was in Erin's essay called Queering the Flame, which, if you're interested, you can find it in her book, The Well of Five Streams. So my understanding changed dramatically when I first started spending time with the older writings and the explorations that later authors have made into them. And despite the fact that some of these uncomfortable truths led to a change in some of my beliefs, like around the perpetual flame, the thing I'm not talking about, I have become more connected to her and more comfortable in my practice as I've integrated all of this over time. Excuse me. So that doesn't mean I wasn't kind of off kilter for a while, because I was. And when I first started doubting some of the things that I had accepted as given, it did make me wonder, well, where do I go with this? Does this practice still have validity? And I think it very much does. But that's for everyone to decide for themselves. But the greatest closeness that I have felt with her has come when I began writing devotional poetry. I mean, I'd always written one or two pieces, but when I started really writing a lot of it, and the more I wrote, the more I read, and the more I wrote, and the more I did, and so on, and that really changed the level of comfort and closeness that I've felt with my practice and with Brigid. So the thing that I am going to mostly be talking about today, or hopefully working with you on, is what I'm calling creative integration. And I know that phrase is used for some other things, but for me, it's taking the material, whatever it is, the story that you heard from your grandmother, or the story that you read in one of Saint Brigit's lives, or something like that. Taking that and not just thinking about it with your head, but interpreting it with your creativity, so that it kind of passes through you. It has to become a part of you. It's not just a particle of information that you have read, but you've processed it in your own body and expressed it with your own body. And well, let me read a couple of quotes. Susan McCaslin writes, "Why is creativity essential to the mystical life? It lies at its very core." Evelyn Underhill says, "We know a thing only by uniting with it, by assimilating it, by an interpenetration of it and ourselves. It gives itself to us just insofar as we give ourselves to it. Wisdom is the fruit of communion. Ignorance, the inevitable portion of those who stand apart, judging, analyzing the things which they have never truly known." And which Richard Wagamies says, "What you express, you experience. What you experience, you are." So if things go well, something always moves our studying of Brigid toward a closer connection with her. It goes out of our head and into our heart. And in my humble opinion, this always involves bringing what we learn of her into our own lives in a meaningful way. So there are a number of ways that I could think of, and I'm sure you can think of more, to facilitate creative integration. You can take classes. That can spark lots of creativity. Attend rituals. Go on pilgrimages, whether they're led by others, like Saint Brigid's Way in Ireland, or self-led. which you could also do on Saint Brigid's Way. You can meditate on specific tales or aspects of Brigid. Artwork, drawings, crafts, like making drawings, doing crafts. One of the Daughters of the Flame mentioned that she, for many months, worked on a cross stitch of Brigid only during her flame tending shifts. And so it wasn't just a craft, it was a contemplative act. Herbcraft, midwifery, healing, smithcraft, any of those things that you are learning or doing and devoting mindfully and awarely to her. Dance, writing, and that can be nonfiction, fiction, plays, poetry, prayers. I have found in my life poetry to be the best for this kind of work, although I wasn't thinking of it as this kind of work. My intentions were different, but this is what it became. I've found poetry to be the best because it's so immediate. The focus is so narrow and so vivid. I am in that ink bottle. I am in that vellum. I am that bird that's resting on her hand, or that insect on her oak tree, really narrowing in. And you don't have to be a writer or a dancer or a sculptor in order to do this kind of work, because the doing itself is the contemplation, and even the learning is the contemplation and the offering. So, I've also found that writing in this way leads to more learning. I end up asking questions and looking for answers, and some of them are very practical. Like, how was the ink made in Cormac's time? That was really interesting. And in learning that, I was able to write a poem that I felt really happy with, because it did feel so immediate. What sounds might I hear in Brigid's hostel if I was there today? Who were the goddess Brigid's siblings? What does she have in common with her father? A lot. So these are questions that wouldn't probably have arisen for me if I had not been already employing the contemplative gaze and attempting to enter imaginatively into her world. But having had those questions arise, they've really enriched my understanding of her world and my connection to it, and it to my world. So the tales, I'm going to give you 3 examples of this. One is from the tale Cach Moitura, the Second Battle of Moitura. One is the episode of her touching the base of the altar when she is brought into the fold, the religious fold. But I'm going to read it from 3 different lives, because it's the same story, but it has different perspectives. Kildare versus Armagh, and also earlier, the Kildare one in the 7th century to the 8th century to the 9th century. And one thing from the non-literary tradition, which are rites associated with Saint Brigit's Day, or rather Saint Bride's Day, because it's in Scotland, and in particular, what happens when she doesn't show a sign that she's been here to our home on her night. So enough talking. Well, I'm going to talk some more, but we're going to do it differently now. Enough head. So I'd like you to Center in on your body. You can close your eyes if you want to, or you can keep them open. If there's something that helps connect you to Brigit, a flame or an image or a bodily posture, anything you like, just you can sit with that now. Pay attention to your breath, not in order to change it, but just to notice, are you holding your breath? Are you breathing rapidly and shallowly? Are you constrained in your position? Do you need to make yourself a little more comfortable? Now's a good time to do that. Notice how your body feels. Is your back supported? Is your neck comfortable? Are you in a position where you can let your mind wander in other directions and still be all right when you come back? Idyll. In the pool emerging from your earth-clasped stream, 3 small white fishes describe sacred paths. Hazels drop ripe nuts into your waters. Alder rise graceful from your banks. I plait the prayer I will leave for you, tied on a willow branch. Each element of this silent place, you. So, Kachmaitura. Now every day the battle was drawn up between the race of the Favore and the Tua de Danann, but there were no kings or princes waging it, only fierce and arrogant men. One thing which became evident to the Favore in the battle seemed remarkable to them. Their weapons, their spears and their swords were blunted, and those of their men who were killed did not come back the next day. That was not the case with the Tua de Danann. Although their weapons were blunted one day, they were restored the next. Now this is what used to kindle the warriors who were wounded there, so that they were more fiery the next day. Dienkecht and his 2 sons and his daughter Ermid were chanting spells over the well-named Slania. They would cast their mortally wounded men into it as they were struck down, and they were alive when they came out. Their mortally wounded were healed through the power of the incantation made by the 4 physicians who were around the well. Now that was damaging to the Favore, and they picked a man to reconnoiter the battle and the practices of the Tuatha, Ruadan, the son of Bresh and of Brig, the daughter of the Dagda, because he was a son and a grandson of the Tuatha. Then he described to the Favore the work of the smith and the carpenter and the brazier, the 4 physicians who were around the well. They sent him back to kill one of the Eshdana, Govnu. He requested a spear point from him, its rivets from the brazier, and its shaft from the carpenter, and everything was given to him as he asked. But after the spear had been given to him, Ruadan turned and wounded Govnu. He pulled out the spear and hurled it at Ruadan so that it went through him, and he died in his father's presence in the Favorian assembly. Brig came and keened for her son. At first she shrieked. In the end she wept. Then for the first time, weeping and shrieking were heard in Ireland. Then Govnu went into the well, and he became whole. And so this is one of the poems I've written in response to that. Red-haired boy. That one, hair the color of dried blood, latched his mouth to your swollen breast. That hair, that mouth made from you, from his half-foreign father, drank you into himself and grew. That child, every portion of him the promise of a king, his father the beautiful, his grandfather the good God, his mother goddess of word and craft. How could he not fall prey to those who twisted, turned him? How could he not wish to please his father well? Yet how could he come before his mother's people, before the smith who loved him, beg of him a splendid spear, seek to cut him down? When the spear refused the service, when the smith wrenched back his arm, hurled the weapon home, how could your son not fall? Before him hundreds died, born again in the well of wholeness, that well now shattered. Ruodon remained as he fell, lay screaming on crimson ground until silence on the land. And you, how could you not upwell as the divine river before you broke its banks, and all the horror and all the sorrow of that awful scything not emerge in ululation, the birth of keening at the slaying of your son? Of the greenwood pedestal and altar base, from Cogitosus's Vita Sancta Brigide. When her parents wanted to betroth her to a man according to the custom of the world, Brigid, inspired from above and wanting to devote herself as a chaste virgin to God, went to the most holy Bishop Macalia of blessed memory. Seeing her heavenly desire and modesty, and seeing so great a love of chastity in this remarkable maiden, he placed the white veil and white garment over her venerable head. Kneeling humbly before God and the bishop, as well as before the altar, and offering her virginal crown to Almighty God, she touched with her hand the wooden base on which the altar rested. To commemorate her unsullied virtue, this wood flourishes fresh and green to the present day, as if it had not been cut down and stripped of its bark, but was attached to its roots. And to this day it rids all the faithful of afflictions and diseases. Vita Prima Sancta Brigide, the second life of Saint Brigid. Then Saint Brigid, taking 3 nuns with her, went to the territory of the O'Neill, to the 2 holy bishops, Mel and Melchu, who were disciples of Saint Patrick and lived in the towns of Meath. And they had a certain disciple called Macalia, who said to Mel, "Look, there are holy virgins outside who wish to receive the veil of virginity from your hands." Then he ushered them into the bishop's presence, and while Bishop Mel was gazing intently at them, a column of fire suddenly appeared, rising from Brigid's head up to the very top of the church in which she dwelt. Then the holy Bishop Mel placed the veil on St. Brigid's head, and when the prayers had been read, Brigid bowed her head and seized the wooden foot of the altar in her hand. And since that moment, the altar foot has permanently remained fresh, without any decay or blemish. And St. Brigid's eye was healed forthwith when she received the veil. And from Mael Brigde. On a certain day, she goes with 7 virgins to take the veil to a foundation on the side of Crochan of Briela, where she thought that Mel the bishop dwelt. There she greets 2 virgins who dwelt there. They said, "The bishop is not here, but in the churches of Maetolach." While saying this, they behold a youth called Macalia, a pupil of Mel the bishop. They asked him to lead them to the bishop. He said, "The way is trackless. with marshes, deserts, bogs, and pools. The saint said, "Extricate us from our difficulty." As they proceeded on their way, he could see afterwards a straight bridge there. The hour of consecration having arrived, the veil was raised by angels from the hand of Macaulay, the minister, and is placed on the head of Saint Brigit. Bent down, moreover, during the prayers, she held the ash beam which supported the altar. It was afterwards changed into acacia, which is neither consumed by fire nor does it grow old through centuries. The bishop, being intoxicated with the grace of God there, did not recognize what he was reciting from his book, for he consecrated Brigit with the orders of a bishop. "This virgin alone in Ireland," said Mael, "will hold the episcopal ordination." While she was being consecrated, a fiery column ascended from her head. So it's only in that one life that she becomes a bishop. Ordination of Brigit, bishop. Your fingers, careless, light as lace wings, glance off my hardened heartwood, long dead altar in this dark church. Green blushes, forgotten channels rush with wakened life. Leaf tips lift upward, branchlets purl out from my curtained board. Priest speaks quickly, words not under his control. As you are raised from simple nun to bishop, you raise me in my turn, from lifeless slab to teeming wood. And this is from the Carmina Gadelica, Volume 1. On Bride's Eve, the girls of the townland fashion a sheaf of corn into the likeness of a woman. They dress and deck the figure with shining shells, sparkling crystals, primroses, snowdrops, and any greenery they may obtain. The girls carry it in procession, singing the song of beauteous bride, virgin of 1,000 charms. They visit every house, and every person is expected to give a gift to bride and to make obeisance to her. The gift may be a shell, a spar, a crystal, a flower, or a bit of greenery to decorate the person of bride. Mothers, however, offer a bride bannock, cheese, or roll of butter. The older women are also busy on the eve of bride, and great preparations are made to celebrate her day, which is the first day of spring. They make an oblong basket in the shape of a cradle, which they call the bed of bride. It is embellished with much care. Then they take a choice sheaf of corn, generally oats, and fashion it into the form of a woman. After a ritual of welcoming, the women then place the icon of bride with great ceremony in the bed they have so carefully prepared for it. They place a small, straight white wand, the bark being peeled off, beside the figure. The women then level the ashes on the hearth, smoothing and dusting them over carefully. In the early morning, the family closely scan the ashes. If they find the marks of bride, they rejoice. Should there be no marks on the ashes and no traces of bride's presence, the family are dejected. It is to them a sign that she is offended and will not hear their call. To propitiate her and gain her ear, the family offer oblations and burn incense. The oblation generally is a cockerel, some say a pullet, buried alive near the junction of 3 streams, and the incense is burnt on the hearth when the family retire for the night. Appeasement. On the eve of bride, we wove your cradle, your figure out of oats, called welcome as you walked the eyeless night. Come, bride, welcome, stop with us. We offered food and right in your holy name, made place for you at our ample board. Come, bride, welcome, stop with us. Best fed in all of winter, well content, hopeful you had heard our ardent prayers. We leveled the ash, smoothed the ash in the sleeping hearth, awaiting the sign that you had blessed. Come, bride, welcome, stop with us. Morning shatters, no print of heel, no mark of saintly soul left in the still warm ash, no dent from the tip of your slender white birch staff. Come, bride, we beg you, stop with us. How did we fail you, beauteous bride? How did we disappoint? In shame and fear we made your sacrifice. Come, bride, we beg you, stop with us. Dug a hole where 3 cold streams brayed whispering to one, pressed in the twisting fertile fowl. Come, bride, we beg you, stop with us. Spaded on the stony earth, covered for you, this bird not black nor white, not living nor yet dead, nor in the world, nor in the place below. Come, bride, we beg you, stop with us. Mother of the threshold, have mercy on us, those whose need is stark, whose hearts are true. Come, bride, welcome, stop with us. Take this gift, we beseech you, be forgiving. Come, bride, welcome, bless our home. So now I'd like you to choose one of those texts, which hopefully Rachel has popped into the comments. And if she hasn't, hopefully she will pop them in now. So choose one of them to reread or just reflect back on. And think of a way that you can immerse yourself in it now and become part of the story. Don't worry if it's good or the best you can do or well thought out. It can be completely spontaneous. You can get the details wrong. It doesn't matter. Just allow yourself. I'm going to give you a few minutes right now to maybe write a poem, maybe do a dance, something inspired by one of these texts. And I'll give you 5 minutes. Time for contemplation and to write or draw or sing. And then there'll be a closing meditation. But if you're watching a recording after the fact, you could pause the video now and do the closing meditation when you've taken as long as you want for this. Or if you're listening live, you might want to continue your work on your immersion and creative expression after the end of the program. Okay. If you take just another minute to come to a pause. So if you can pause there, take a moment to recenter in your body. Take in some quieting breaths, or just pay attention to the sensation of your clothing on your body, the air against your skin, the sounds in the room, sounds out of the room. And ask yourself if your understanding of the story, or your feeling towards the story or Brigid, has changed at all since you began this work. And if you want to, feel free to jot something down. I'll sing a short closing prayer. And Rachel will be putting the resources list that I mentioned earlier in the comments section well, I guess you can do it now, actually, Rachel. And if you have any questions or comments you'd like to make, she can pass those on to me so I can answer them. So we have a few minutes for that now. Thank you. Thanks, Daniela. I saw two comments. If there were any more, I wasn't looking in the right place, so I missed them, but I often find at the end of a meditation, we're all a little too to really think of any questions. So if you have anything come up later that you'd like to mention or ask about, feel free to get a hold of me either in the comments below here, or you can get a hold of me through my own Facebook profile, which is Mael Brigde, or on Instagram or Twitter or, well, Pinterest, but I'm almost never there. All right, I guess that's it. Hey, Rachel? Rachel?